welcome back to another Swift tutorial. In today's video, we're going to be learning about the Firebase real-time database. So we're going to be learning how to set it up, more importantly, how to read and write data to it and from it. So in my browser here, we have a Firebase application set up, and as you can see, we have these entries in our database with these keys. And if we come over here and hit this button, let's hit it a few times, you'll notice that we have these new entries that just got added with these keys and random numbers at the end. You'll also notice for this something key, the value is this name and YouTube key, and we actually print that to the top of the screen when we open up the app. We're querying the database, so we're going to learn how to set all this good stuff up. Firebase has been super heavily requested from you guys. If you want to hear more Firebase things, which I presume you do, please leave a comment down below. That said, hope you guys are excited. Make sure you smash that like button down below. Helps out the video and channel quite a bit. Subscribe if you're new. Get Xcode ready, and let's jump right into it. Real quick before we jump into this video, as many of you have seen and also asked, I am putting together a iOS Academy for you all with several courses, one-on-one examples, coaching, a community where we can all collaborate on everything iOS and mobile apps. So you can head on over to ios.academy/waitlist and sign up with your email here, and you'll be notified once things become available. So that said, let's jump into the video. So let's get started by creating a new project. We'll stick with a single view application, and let's give this a name of My Database. Stick it on our desktop, and let's jump right in. So the first thing we need to do is bring in Firebase and the Firebase Database part of the library so we can use them. So we're going to use CocoaPods, so let's open up Terminal and cd into our project. If you don't know what CocoaPods are or don't have them set up, please take a look at my earlier video where I go through it. Then you can follow along with the following commands. So we're going to cd into the project and do a pod init. And let me expand this a little bit. Now we're going to do an open pod file. And we want to bring in two things in here. The first one is the core library aspect of Firebase, so Firebase/core. And the next thing we want to bring in is the Firebase database. So basically Google has separated the aspects of Firebase into these slash notations, so we don't have to bring in everything in Firebase into the project because, as you can imagine, it's quite large. So once we've done that, let's make sure to lowercase the p in pod and close text edit. Now in terminal, we can do a pod install. And we'll see some green installation messages like so. There's more than the two that we've added in the pod file because there's underlying dependencies. But we can now hit Command K to clear this, hit Command W to close this window of Xcode, and do a open project name .xc workspace. And the workspace, of course, now includes the CocoaPods that we need to use Firebase and the database. So let's expand Xcode and let's open up this project tree over here. And what I like to do is hit Command R just to build and run, make sure everything is still working post installation. And while it's doing that, let's go to firebase.com to set up the project in the Firebase Console. So once you're on firebase.com, sign in, hit this button to create a new project. And we're gonna create one called database example. Continue, pretend like we read all of this and continue. And it wants an account for Google Analytics that it's gonna link, so we're gonna use this default one, pretend like we read the terms, hit continue. And it's basically setting up the project, and then we're gonna add the iOS app that we've got over here. So what I'll actually do while it's doing that is hit this, and copy our bundle identifier. We're going to need to paste this into here. So now that this is done, we can hit this to continue. On this screen, we want to hit iOS and set up an instance of our iOS app. So a project can have one or more apps of different kinds, iOS, Android, web. So of course we're working with iOS, so let's paste that bundle ID. Let's give this a generic name of database iOS. Leave this ID empty because we're lazy. And we're going to download next this Google Services plist file, which includes configuration settings for our Firebase app. We need to bring this into our project, so let me drag that to the desktop. And let's hit next a bunch of times. It's just going to tell us that we need to install CocoaPods and do stuff to set it up that we'll do together. And now it's giving us a spinner because it's waiting for our app to communicate to Firebase. So let's go to Xcode, set it up, and launch it in the simulator. So let's start by dragging this file into our project. Make sure this top box is checked to copy the file. And if we actually click in this, you'll see that there's a database URL. And we haven't even actually configured our database here, but Google knows based on this instance of a Firebase project that it's created that this will be the database URL. So just kind of cool to look at and know. Next, we want to go to the app delegate. And in here, we need to do a little bit of work to set up Firebase. So import Firebase. And in application did finish launching, we want to do a Firebase app. Firebase app.configure. And now we want to run it on our simulator. So let's hit Command R. And now the simulator should communicate with Firebase, and we'll see a check mark here in a second. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time and it's slightly annoying. You have to do it a few times. Hopefully it's fast this time. If it takes time, I'll forward the video. So what I like to do also is delete the app from the simulator and reinstall it for a fresh installation. Not sure if that actually helps, but it gives me sanity, and it seems like it works. So let's delete it. Hit Command R. And sometimes you just need to let it run in the simulator for a couple seconds. There it goes. This has taken sometimes 1 or 2 tries for me, all the way to like 5 minutes. So if it takes a second, just bear with it. But once it's good to go, you'll see this. So let's hit this button to continue. And now what we care about under this Develop tab, or Develop menu section, whatever we want to call it here, is this database. So basically, the Firebase database has 2 aspects of it. There's the real-time database, which is a NoSQL database, and there's the Firestore, which you can store documents and images and all that good stuff in. So we're going to be looking at the real-time NoSQL database today. So let's hit this to continue, and it's going to ask us a couple of things to set it up. We want to stick with this test mode instead of production. It'll set our security rules to allow anyone to read and write, and it makes testing and just developing easier. Of course, in a real application, you want production to have some security. But let's hit continue. Hit this button again. Let's pretend like we read everything here. Gives us our region. Hit this again. And it's setting up our database. And let's see, shouldn't take too long. Also, it started pouring like 2 seconds ago, so I don't know if you guys can hear the rain outside, but it's slightly annoying. But if you hear it, that's what it is. Now this will set this up, and we can actually, while it's doing this, let's actually go to our view controller. So what we want to do in here is we want to import Firebase Database. And what I like to do is I like to create a singleton or a variable for our database. So let's say we have a private let database is a database dot reference. So this drives me nuts why they called this first variable database, because the next thing is called database. But I don't know, Google made their decision. But this basically gives us a reference to our real-time NoSQL database. So we're going to read and write some data in just a moment. All right, so back on the Firebase console, it looks like it set everything up. we're looking at the Firestore here, so we want to hit this to get our dropdown. And if you notice, there's a real-time database, and we have the Cloud Firestore. So let's go to the real-time database, and you'll see that there's no data in here. Before we can read and write anything, we need to go to the rules, and if you notice that the read and write is set to false. So we want to update this to be true, and true. Hit Command S to save, and it will save. Now we can read and write into this database. So I don't want to dive too deep into the semantics of NoSQL versus a SQL database, but what I'll say is the data in this database is structured in a JSON tree. So key and value pairs, rather than a traditional database where you have tables and rows. So I can do an in-depth video on that as well, but let's just read and write something for the sake of this example. So let me create a button. Now we tap the button, we're going to add an entry to the database. So we're going to create a button. It'll be a UI button with a frame, CG rect. Let's give it an X, Y, width, and height. So let's say X is 20, Y is 200, width is view.frame.size.width minus 40, and height is 50. Of course, let's give this a title, an action, and let's add it as a subview. So let's say button, set title, add entry for normal. Let's say button, set title color as white for normal as well. Let's give this a background color. Let's add it as a subview. And most importantly, let's add a action. So add target, self, action is going to be the function we call. So let's call it add new entry. And it'll be on touch-up inside. So let's create this add new entry. So add objc for Objective-C, private function, add new entry. And we can simply now say database, and we want this lowercase 1, which is a property that we defined up here. Set child. Let's see. Is it add child? Add observer, that's not what we want. We want child. Let's do something. Set value, I believe. That's what we want. So basically the notion is this child is some key in our JSON tree for the NoSQL database. And the value, if you caught it there, if we do a set value again, you see the autocomplete. It takes any optional type. So if we provide nil, it'll actually delete anything in the database with this key for this child. Or if we provide anything that is compliant to the NoSQL database, it'll put it there. So let me do this, and let's create an object. And let's say this object is of type string, string. And let's say we want the first one to be name. It'll be iOS Academy. And this should be as NS object. And this is good practice that Google just recommends. You actually don't need it. And it personally kind of irks me, but we're just going to do it for the sake of good practice. Let's say YouTube, yes, and let's just leave it there and see what we get. So this needs to be a proper string. Let's run this app and see what we get. It looks like I messed this up. So we want this as NS object and this one's a string. So let's make this any. And it'll compile. So let's hit Command R to build and run. And we have our button here. What's really cool is when you start adding entries, you actually don't need to reload this page. You'll see them pop up here. So let's hit this button. And we should have an entry here now. And if you look at that, we have this entry, and this is the key. And if we open this up, you'll see there's our data. So what you might be thinking is, what happens if we hit this again? So if you look at this, we still have just this one entry. So where is our new entry? So the reason it's not adding a new entry is, as JSON works, every key needs to be unique. So we have this key of something here, and every time we hit the button, we're simply overriding its value. So what we want to do is let's actually append a random integer value, and that way we'll get a unique key every time. So we're getting a random int between 0 and 100, and every time we hit the button now, we should, in theory, get a new entry. There's a very slight probability that the key will not be unique. For example, we'll get something 1 and something 1 again, but pretty unlikely. So let me hit this 3 times. And if we come back here, you notice now we have 3 new entries. Now, of course, the value is the same, and in a real application, you might have users and things like that, but that's basically how you would get data into this database. So let's actually pull this data back out. So what I'll do is in view.load, let's actually get the value of this something back out without the underscore. And every time we come to this controller, what we're going to do is we are going to say database child, and we're going to observe an event type. And this event type is going to have, with a snapshot, let's see. What we want is this first one, actually. So we want to observe, should be a value, and we want to observe a single event. So let me see. So when we observe, there's actually a couple things you need to understand. There's this observe single value, and then there's this observe in general. So observe single value is as if you're querying your database one time. So Firebase will send you a single value of whatever the most recent database value is. If you do a normal observe, every time the database value changes, you'll get this function call. And the reason this is good is because your data can stay up to date, but the reason it's bad is you can imagine if you have 1 million entries, your code becomes very inefficient really fast. So architecting and designing your database is very interesting in itself. Maybe I'll do a whole video on it. The next thing I'll mention is you can observe different things. So you can observe when a child is removed, and a child is anything that points, anything this key, in this case something, anything sub of that something points to in the JSON dictionary. But we care about the value. And this will actually give us a completion block with a snapshot, and the snapshot will actually have a value in it. So what we're going to now say is guard let snap, let's say guard let value actually is snapshot.value as, and we know this is the type of the snapshot, rather of the value that we put into the database. So we're going to do guard let as that. If it's not that, we'll return. Otherwise, let's print out whatever is returned to us in value. So let's actually run this because it's in view.load. And let me expand the console so we can actually see this a little better. So let's hit Command R to build in run, and we should get whatever we've saved in the database for our value for something. So we see name is iOS Academy, YouTube is yes. So if we go back to the console, you'll see under something, we have YouTube yes and iOS Academy. So maybe not the best example because that's what everything else down here is too. But the thing to understand is the key, rather the child that we are querying for is something without any suffix at the end or any number. And the key that we are looking for here in this case is also something. So that's basically how you read and write to a database. Something that I'll mention also, even though I mentioned so many things I didn't plan to, is a lot of people will say, well, how do I query everything in this database, right? So traditionally in a normal SQL database, you can say, give me all the rows that have X value. So one trick is you can design a key to point to an array. So let's say you want to hold an array of users or an array of something. So I've actually done this several times in the past where instead of managing each of these top level child keys, you can have a key point to an array and update that array. So that's one way of doing it, but keep in mind that every time a user gets added, you have to replace that whole value. So database design itself is a very vague, broad topic. So let me know in the comments below if you want to learn more about it. The other thing I'll mention is I keep saying the other thing I'll mention, I might as well just mention all my things. I have a lot of requests from you guys to do a Firebase chat application video. So I added that to my to-do list. Let me know in the comments if you particularly want to also see that, and if I get enough interest, I'll prioritize that ahead of everything else. So that said, that's all I had for you guys today, how to read and write to a database. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you haven't smashed that like button already, please make sure to do so. Helps out the video and channel quite a bit. If you're new, subscribe if you found it useful. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.